We have a Newsmax clip that's a late entry, and it's them talking about the rail strike here, and yeah, we can just watch this. This is, and I will say, I don't know if it was. I'll look up who said this, but someone on Twitter pointed out that. That's weird. That the camera just came on. Someone pointed out that this is the first sort of mainstream media interview with an actual worker during this entire thing, like CNN. None of those folks do any of that. But
well, they did do 6 minutes on Hunter Biden's laptop not having anything on it that was connected to Joe Biden.
Exactly.
Not that they emphasize that. But.
Here's Newsmax. I mean, shout out to whatever producer lined this up, talking to railroad worker David Manning.
David, we did reach out to the Association of American Railroads, and they say that workers get sick days and paid time off. But what I want to talk to you about is, what does this mean for Americans if you do go on strike?
Well, whoever told you we get our sick days is manipulating the data. We get paid time off that we earned the previous year before. Before the new policy came about, we were allowed to take 5 days off and 2 weekend days off a month. Now we could take virtually 1 day unpaid off a month. And then the only other time we could take off is our paid time that we had to earn the previous year.
Yeah, that does seem ridiculous. They would never let airline pilots do that. Is that issue number one for members of the unions?
100% is number one. And if we go on strike, yes, it could hurt the economy. It could be bad for society, but we don't want to do that. None of us want to do that.
Well, and I know Amtrak's already suspended.
We're not asking.
I'll just say he has a shirt on there that says "Labor does not contribute to profit." It's a quote from the Federal Mediators Report, which summarizes the position of the railroads, which says the carriers maintain that capital investment and risk are the reasons for their profits, not any contributions by labor. Which is, of course, they're going to say that as they're trying to crush labor. And people should know labor is the only source of profits. And also, I think I don't want to criticize this guy. I think he's it's a tough job to go on to Newsmax to speak that. But let's just the thing he said about it might not be good for society. Fundamentally, all this stuff, when working people stand up for their rights, it is good for society. The short term, any sort of short-term complications are the fault of the folks who did not deliver for those workers what they needed to do their work.
Yeah, they're constantly on the defense because of that framing, as if it is the fault of the striking workers, and it seems like an agreement has been reached, so a strike is likely to be avoided. But that it is on the backs of the workers who want just standard overtime protections that most employees in this country are supposed to have due to federal protections, but there's a carve out for railway workers. They want just like standard wage protections, increases, and overtime protections. It is not their fault. It is the corporation's fault for, if there were to be a strike, for not acquiescing to that and paying their workers what it's worth. But it doesn't matter what media you look at. If it's not leftist media, they're always framing it as that, as it like the fault of the strikers.
A real record scratch moment for Newsmax's Rob Finnerty. He was like,
oh, what?
I can't take days off ever?
Yeah, and it's interesting, like Ben Shapiro says, this is what happens when you elect Democrats. They just give unions everything they want. Well, first of all, no, I don't think that's what's happened here. I think we need to be very careful about celebrating this as a victory until the rank and file ratify it. There's going to be a cooling off period, is my understanding, until people assess how they like it. And I think indications seem mixed at best for people supporting this. I think there's still a lot of upset. And but Ben Shapiro's saying they give him the sweetheart deal. That's exactly what Joe Biden wants Ben Shapiro to be saying at that moment, because then it makes his bargaining position, which is to come to an agreement marginally more pro-labor than what a Republican would do, but still very much, keeping management up there where they belong. And Ben Shapiro is working with Biden when he says that.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to echo what Emma was saying. I think this is a classic tactic that we see from, corporatists when they want to divide the workforce, when they want to divide labor by implying that unionized labor is working in opposition to the, to the desires and needs of like the everyday average American that's represented by like the suburban family, which like railway workers, teachers, service workers all just exist in, in purpose of serving in their sort of suburban enclaves. And the idea that it's, this is like something that's going to overall enhance the strength of the labor market, enhance workers, is just foreign, because labor and labor history has been removed from our curriculum. So it's easy for people, to believe that there is some sort of like, citizen workforce that is divorced from labor by like believing that there's like a management as separate from like, essentially the proletariat, but also that like it's their fault when society breaks down. Because we know Amtrak was basically just like threatening a lockout. It was less of a strike to begin with, than Amtrak just deciding, okay, well, if they keep making a fuss, we're just going to like stop trains and blame any disruptions on them.
All right. I like Matt said earlier, I don't know. We don't know this guy's politics, but seeing this topic being brought up on Newsmax, and I don't know, if he was just, if he's a fan of the channel and was happy to go on, or if he had this calculation too. But seeing this discussion on Newsmax, a outlet which, you would never see discussion of labor disputes, and if you did, it certainly wouldn't be in the framing of for the workers. This was well done. Just to hear them say some of these things and break through to that audience, even just maybe a tad, maybe a little bit,
maybe chipping away.
Yeah, I'll just say, like, Jonah Furman and different folks are following the reaction, and it does not seem like people are greeting this as, the workers are greeting this as a victory. I think they're greeting it as the opposite.
Interesting. Yeah, more details still coming out, so we'll probably have more for you guys tomorrow. The Bestest Leftist writes in, "Hey, MR crew, I gotta say that it's extremely disappointing how people on the left, specifically the defund the police and abolish prison, have been lashing out on Twitter, calling people fascist, right-wingers, or other BS insults because most people think those slogans are hurting progressives. I read an essay that has passed around by prison abolitionists that was supposed to state what we do with violent offenders if there's no prisons. The essay basically stated a bunch of prison reforms, which most everyone agrees with, but the answer to that question was what we need to abolish the type of society that creates violent people. Apparently, think into the last part isn't a sufficient answer, and believing that we'll always need some sort of humane detention for violent offenders makes you a fascist. It's so absurd. Wondering if you want to weigh in on any of this." I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but I will say, like, I feel it's my responsibility in covering these issues on this show to, when you're deciding what you want to cover, it's not just about how you cover something. It's also about editorial discretion on what you want to emphasize. And so, like, in the case of, what's been debated, like, do I think somebody should get sucker punched by somebody who was a violent offender? Of course not. But stories about, like, when it bleeds, it leads. It's all over local news all the time. And Bloomberg did a story about crime here in New York and how it's been essentially overemphasized by the media as crime rates decreased, and how it's created like this incentive, even though it did tick up slightly in the pandemic. But overall, for decades, crime has decreased largely in society. And so, like, in progressive media, I do think it's our responsibility to be conscious not just of how we cover the news, but of what we cover, because we're an alternative source that is not there to fearmonger. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would also just say, like, as just people, it's difficult to speak to the personal interactions that people online have with other people online. And I know it's like, especially when those interactions are negative, it's very tempting to, like, in some way extrapolate that out to be true of the entire community. But at the end of the day, some people online are just more aggressive than others. Like, the Twitter space is a place that kind of encourages that sort of conflicting behavior. So mostly what I would just encourage is that if you're interested in prison abolition and that thing, and you're not already, is to actually get involved in, like, offline prison abolitionist spaces and groups. Critical Resistance, the one is one that I think people talk around about a lot. I'm not necessarily sure, so don't quote me on that. But, if you're going to get into the space where you're just going to say, okay, everyone I talk to online, or everyone who comes into my field online is this way about this thing, I think you're going to find yourself, like, making a lot of, like, jumping to a lot of negative conclusions about that. just because like it's not going to be productive because it's online space, which doesn't like absolve anyone of being an asshole. It's just not something you can draw large conclusions about any movement from.
Yeah, and I just feel like to emphasize like how the prison abolitionist movement and the defund movement is hurting like any overall kind of debater is being naive, I think is a problem that's a bit more insular to like a leftist discourse that really has no bearing on the practical realities of where we're at with criminal justice reform. Like, we are so far away from prison abolition and from even like restorative justice being implemented in lots of areas in this country that it's not the job of activists to be nuanced. It's the job to push for more, and that is what's happening here.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like, I have, well, India Walton kind of, when she ran in Buffalo, she sort of was a little bit averse to the defund language and more focused on emphasizing the reinvestment that comes from taking money from the police and actually reinvesting it back into the community. And William Shockey of Africa as a Country also said, like, that slogan, while like the intentions are great, that in a place like South Africa, that's going to lead to austerity and nothing and no reinvestment, right? So like, I think there are quibbles you can have with a slogan, but I ultimately think there's no light without heat, and these are all arguments that need to be happening. And I understand where a lot of the heat comes from. Like, I understand why people are really anxious to avoid any sort of rhetoric that would play into a tough on crime stance. And I also understand that like there is a particularly mental health crisis, and the people that we talk to that are organizing places like Chipotle or Starbucks are often on the front lines of dealing with that. And we actually do need to do more for folks. Prison abolition, like I think what you hinted at there is that I think most people acknowledge a role for the state in confining people away if they are going to mean harm to them. Like, there has to be some sort of protection, right? The incarceration system is not for, in my opinion, punishment, because I don't think that works. But I do think there is a limited role for protecting other people from, but that includes, like we said, reinvestment into things like mental health and the other sort of quality of life things that need to be taken care of in this country, which we decidedly are not.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, at its core goes down to a different philosophy about crime and the prevention of crime that leftists generally adhere to as the leftist theory of crime, that like people aren't going out into the streets looking to do crimes. The crime is not committed by roving, at least not the majority of crime is not committed by roving bands of like evil people who are like waiting in the night to like, do serial killings or do kidnappings. Crime generally is committed by, crimes of opportunity, crimes that's a result of maldistribution of resources, or crimes that's a result of, all sorts of resources. And as leftists working on prison abolition, police abolition, highlighting that the current modality or paradigm for like criminal justice is not about justice, it's about punishment. It presumes that the best way to solve these issues is to incarcerate people within our inhumane carceral system, which is also largely money laundering scheme, not money laundering, but a way to funnel money to large corporations in the prison industrial complex. But yeah, it's just like a different view about why people commit crimes. And so the solution to the carceral state is a bucket of reforms that, funnel resources to those who need it the most. And then, that's the first step in separating the wheat from the chaff. And then we continue to pare away at like the various things that cause people to commit crimes until maybe we do find a core of people who just like are evil. The Riddler bursts out of the scenes. Like who knows?
Yeah.
But certainly having like what, a 1% or 4% or something, like I think it's 9 million people last time I checked involved in some way in the carceral state is not the solution to the problem. And I think that, getting into this mindset where like everyone on Twitter is like responsible for like being the best advocate for a position, and there's no role for like actual activists to get on the street and educate people about, and that there's no way to build consensus, and then instead we just all have to be on our best behavior. It's like, it's just a fatalistic argument. At some point, the left has to build consensus that the way we're doing things and the philosophy underpinning the way we're doing things, i.e. privatization, punishment, etc., is just not only ideologically not the right way, but practically has led to us to be like a failing state.
And I think it's also important just to note who is behind some of the rhetoric in like particularly big cities about how crime is out of control. And oftentimes it's landlords and large real estate corporations that want to maintain a specific like level of valuation for their properties that are sharing this stuff, pushing this stuff, and the right wing is jumping on it. So I think that it's the responsibility of us to just at least hold space for a counter narrative to that, which is more grounded in humanity and facts. That's just my take on it.